Hello, this is John Maggiore with Maggioreonbowie.com. And you're here on the Maggioreonbowie.com YouTube channel, which is an affiliate of the blog, Maggioreonbowie.com. On this channel, you will find a weekly interview that has something to do with David Bowie. And on the blog, you will find daily content. I update it every day, almost always with something about David Bowie. Today, I have a really, really special guest who, if you're a Bowie fan, actually doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Mark Plati is a New York-based musician, record producer, songwriter, and everything else. Worked with David Bowie starting in the mid-90s through Reality in the period just before David Bowie's hiatus. Mark is involved in just about every aspect of music, from playing multiple instruments, including the bass and guitar, to concert promotion, technical work, discovery of new talent, and keeping the Bowie flame alive with active participation in what I think of as the David Bowie Alumni Association. I recently saw Mark perform with the band Killer Star in New York City, and we'll see him again at the same venue, the Cutting Room, for what I think, and you could correct me, is becoming an annual Bowie tribute show featuring a wide array of former Bowie collaborators. The upcoming show is in January of 2025. And I have to say, when I saw Mark perform with Killer Star, there was an excellent opening act, a young woman named Sohn, who has an amazing voice. And she thanked Mark, who I know is working with her. And I really felt like I was getting a glimpse at the future. And so Mark is kind of a living continuity of music. And I'm really excited to have him here today. So Mark, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much. And now I know how to say your name.
I don't know how to say it, so I'm glad you got the leg up on me.
I'm sure you get as butchered as I do.
It's yeah. Well, people get creative. So let me ask you about the upcoming concert, and did I get it right that it's your intent for it to be annual? I know it's not the first time at the Cutting Room.
Yeah, it's been pretty annual, I think. God, for the last at least 6 or 7 years in that little slot. That seems to be a good slot to do it, just because everybody is in town.
Yeah.
That we do it with, because before everybody spins off and starts doing their thing, and a lot of people are, a lot of us are touring and, we're traveling around to make records or whatever. But it seems like that week after Christmas is still pretty chill, and, the year hasn't really started yet. So that seemed to be pretty ideal as far as getting us all together to do it.
Yeah, and all together, you've amassed some heavy hitters, and you could see some of the names behind me. But who all is participating in this year, and how do you get them? I mean, they're all around, as you just said, but how do you get them all to agree to participate to this type of show?
I think we just send out an email around, September, and say, "Hey, who's around?
Yeah,
Who wants to do it?" And generally, it's pretty fun. I mean, that's really why we do it. It's just like a nice, it's a nice hang, really. And a lot of us do things like outside of the Bowie universe, or we did things together before we were in the universe. So it's just nice to see each other and play these really cool songs, that a lot of us grew up with. So I don't know, it's just all good, really.
Yeah. So if people are watching this before January, you're doing 3 shows that include a show on Bowie's birthday? Are they all sold out at this point?
Not this time. This time we're not doing a January 8th show, just because the calendar didn't line up this time. Just some years it just doesn't work out. Usually, we've been usually ended up doing it the first week in January, just because of the way the dates line up. But this time it's the second week.
Yeah.
Just because of where New Year's lands and all that. So hopefully that'll switch back around, coming down a year or two. I don't know. I haven't looked ahead to see when that would be. But yeah, usually it's around the time of his birthday. It just seems to work out that way for us.
And you're doing it at the Cutting Room, where I saw you with Killer Star. Do you have a special affinity for that venue?
We we just started doing it there. I think it was really the year after he passed. We a lot of us had gotten together to do a show in Madrid, and we really liked doing it. So why don't we try doing it in New York?
Yeah.
And that just seemed, it was like maybe the an ideal venue for us. It was a good size. It wasn't too big, wasn't too small, and I don't know. We just had a real affinity for it, and that's the only place that we do it. Really, we haven't. People have said like, "Can you bring it to England? Can you, travel with it?" And we're not really doing that. It's more like come. It's just like we want to keep it as an event, like a little
Yeah.
isolated event that, and people come and see it and kind of just hang out with us, instead of trying to go around and book halls all over the place. And that's it's a little too ambitious for us, I think. And and then I think the feeling of it would really change because right now it's just, we're just having a good time.
Yeah.
If we become like a business or something, it would just change the feel of the whole thing.
Well, it's, I might be reading into this, but I think it's significant that you're doing this in New York, and there's a lot of New York-based musicians, New York State-based musicians. I know some of your collaborators live in the Hudson Valley, and Bowie himself lived in New York for the last 20 years of his life. When I go to Manhattan, which is, at least once a month, you can't walk down the street without seeing his face somewhere. And Do you get the sense that there's greater interest in him now, 8 years after he passed away, than during some of the last years of his life?
I think it's really different. I mean, as far as him being a New Yorker, I mean, I would say I considered him a New Yorker even when I met him. I mean, a lot of us met him because he was here. I mean, I'm looking at those names now, and yeah, a lot of them were people from here that he met here while working. So I don't know. I always thought he was a New Yorker.
Yeah, yeah,
I knew a number of transplanted Brits, and he seemed to be kind of one of those that he just. And I was actually a transplanted person too. I mean, this city can really seduce you, and all of a sudden you're here like 20 years ago. Oh, what happened? But I don't know. There's just an energy here, and it's just so kind of culturally wide open. Like whatever you want is here, and he knew that. He took advantage of all that, and I think though, yes, since he passed, I guess there's a different way of looking at him in his career. I mean, it's almost a shame, like with artists, like we kind of sometimes we don't get it until they're gone.
right.
Then when there's not going to be any more, then you look at it all. Then you look at all the work, and then you go, "Wow, that was he was really he was really pushing it." And at the time, when I started working with him, uh, it was more about being in the music industry and things like that. I didn't really look at it in such a broad way until maybe I was a year or two into it. And well, this is not just about making a record now. This is like, I'm seeing what he does, and I'm seeing how he's always looking to do something else. And I found that to be just that was like the greatest thing. That was really validation for me about like why I got into doing this. I just never wanted to be bored and doing the same thing over and over. And wow, he was the ideal place for me to land.
So, did you start working with him on the Earthling album?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you worked with him on Earthling Hours, Heathen, and Reality, and then you were touring with him during the tours during that period. Is that correct?
That not the first one, not the Earthling tour, but after that, yeah, I did. I did it.
Okay. And I'm looking at my notes here. On Earthling, you are listed as programming, loops, samples, keyboards, producer, engineer, mixing. And to people with only a casual interest in music, what does all that mean?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. There was basically I kind of acted as the conduit for all of these ideas to go through and be, I guess, represented or make it to the tape machine or however you want to look at it. Like the engineer does the recording and or does the mixing. So I was doing that. And as far as like loops and samples, that was part of why I was brought in, I guess, because I had come up through the New York late '80s era, where like I was in the dance music scene for a while, which is a whole other story how that happened. A lot of this stuff just happens by accident of timing and being something of an opportunist and saying, okay, well, this is not what this was not part of my plan, but this could be interesting. So let's just run with it and see what happens. And so when I met him, I started this whole thing as a rock and roll bass player, basically. And then all of a sudden I'm doing like, drum machine programming and synthesizer programming. On like remixes and things. And that became a very attractive skill to have in the early 90s because a lot of mainstream artists were starting to incorporate that into their sound. And no exception with David. He was very attracted to like a lot of these things I had done. And so it just seemed like, I'd be an interesting element to pull in, which is something else I noticed about him was he was kind of always interested in an interesting element to pull in
Yeah.
into the soup, So that was where I was doing like, drum programming and basically making sort of these beds for songs to be laid on top of, if that makes any sense, like rhythmic beds.
Yeah.
And then adding some, keyboard textures and things as per, what the song dictated, what David and Reeves felt was appropriate, and but for the most part, we all just had free reign. It was kind of on that record, it was a little bit of a triumvirate between David, Reeves, and myself, and everybody just kind of David had the framework. He always had like kind of the framework and the idea, and within that idea, he just wanted you to be you.
Yeah.
So that's how that's how all of that happened. Where, I'm taking Zach Alford's drums and I'm making loops out of them and spitting it out in all these different ways. And got a couple of those songs. It's not even a drum track. It's like Zach just chopped up in a really crazy way, which was really part of the sensibility of that record.
Well, that if people aren't familiar with it, it's influenced by the drum and bass style, and you're going to say that a purist would say it's not, but it's not. It's the drumming that you're talking about and the drum tracks that you're talking about. It's not like the drum that you hear on let's say low or
No,
yeah, right, different function. How did he become aware of you? Um how did he invite you into this project to begin with?
I was just brought in as an engineer. He was looking for a studio to work at, and he'd been working at this place called the Hit Factory uptown, which was one of those kind of posh studios with $200 muffin trays and all kinds of whatever, like really upscale kind of places that were. I always found them a little intimidating personally. And the Looking Glass was the studio owned by Philip Glass, which was just way more homey. And it had a window to the outside world, which was really not conventional at that moment. I mean, all these studios were more like luxurious bunkers at that time, for sonic reasons, of course. But they had a big window in the back of the studio, so you could see daylight, and then day turned into night. Because sometimes you would have no idea what time it is. You go outside like, whoa, it's night. And that's a big bonus. And so David came to see the studio because, and he was connected to Philip because Philip had done his sort of, I guess, his Philip Glass adaptation of David's Low album.
Yeah.
And so that was the connection. And they came to do a little songwriting, and they needed an engineer person, programmer person. And I had a room there. I had my own little pre-production room there. I had discovered the place like 5 years before that, just totally randomly, like everything else. I just went there. Somebody wanted to do a little mix there, and I was like, "Oh, I'll try it out." And then I got there, saw the window, and went, "Ooh, I'm staying here." To the point where about a year or two down the road, I got my own little pre-production room there. So I was working there a lot, and I knew the room really well, which was another um, attractive aspect of having me with David and Reeves.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask this question out of sequence. So you're doing this work, and at some point he realizes you could play the bass.
Yes, that actually came up yesterday. It's really funny where that happened. Again, a total because I don't think during the Earthling album, he didn't know I played bass or guitar. It just didn't come up, you know. It just wasn't part of what we were doing. Um, but then after the record was done, he started to do these promotional dates, like at the Tonight Show, Letterman, all these sorts of things. And they would bring me along to kind of mind the broadcast engineer, make sure that he was understanding it musically, you know, because I wasn't allowed to do it. These are all like union places, so I'm not allowed to touch anything, but I can say like, you know, well, there's too much reverb on that, or these drums need to be a little bit louder, or whatever it was, you know, I could make comments like that. And sometimes they'd listen, and sometimes they wouldn't. But just it was like a little safety measure just to see, you know, he'd feel represented, and that made him comfortable, and that was great. So I went to LA with them to do the Tonight Show. But then while we're out there, Reeves ended up writing a song with Frank Black. And the idea was they would just go into a studio one night and record it while we were out there. Reeves knew I played bass. David didn't, but Reeves knew that. So I went along on the session and played bass. And the drummer happened to be a Mr. Dave Grohl.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. So that was quite a moment. And David was there because David was also, you know, we're all kind of writing a song, you know, together. And so I think that's the first time David knew I played, you know, that I played bass. So that I think that's where it kind of began.
So I want to come back to that, but before we get too far afield from Earthling, I sent you this story. I not that long ago, I posted something on the blog where I mistakenly identified Trent Reznor as the producer of the song "I'm Afraid of Americans," which is, you know, one of the better known songs from Earthling.
Right.
And I was almost immediately corrected by somebody that was an urban legend and not true at all. You were one of the co-producers of that song. And my two-part question is, do you see things like that and get frustrated that the story is being told wrong? And do you think that some of that has to do with the sort of proliferation of AI generated stories that are showing up on social media, or some of these online magazines that might not actually have human beings writing the stories?
Well, the Trent thing is kind of a common misconception, and I get it because that song was released as a single, and for the single, that's a remix that Trent did, and Trent's in the video.
Yeah.
So I completely see why people go there. It makes total sense to me. As far as being frustrated by it, maybe I used to be more than I am now. Now it's sort of like people figure it out or they don't. So not so much. Maybe it just depends on the work in question, you know. But in that case, not really. It's, you know, the album, the credits are clearly stated, so it's like, okay.
Yeah. You're not mad at me. Uh,
No, no,
I
no.
corrected it. I fixed it. But I have the reason I asked that is I've seen that type of error
A lot, sure.
a lot. Yeah. So Reeves Gabriels discovers or knew that you played bass, and then Bowie learns that, but you end up playing guitar for him. And why was that?
Well, I've been playing guitar maybe a year less than I've been playing bass. So I was always a guitar player since, I don't even want to say how long, other than I guess I just celebrated my 50th anniversary. So you all can do that math if you like.
So you started playing when you were like 3? I mean,
I was in the womb, man. It's like absorbing through osmosis,
oh,
all of that. Yeah, so I had been a guitar player anyway, but bass was sort of, I guess bass is just more of a primal thing and for me. So it's
yeah,
I think a lot less when I'm playing bass. Uh, he found out I played guitar on the next record, on Hours. I wasn't called to be a programmer at all. I wasn't called even to be an engineer. That was a totally different kind of record for him that he'd started doing with Reeves, I think in Bermuda, and then they went to England and did it, but then they weren't happy with it, so they came to New York and they were gonna revamp it, work on it, tweak it, all that. And Reeves called me to come and play fretless bass on it. And for me, that was really pretty exciting because since since Earthling, all I was getting called to do was like make Earthling kind of records,
yeah,
do that kind of programming, and that was exactly the thing I never wanted to do, was to get known for doing something and then have to do it for the next 50 years or whatever. That just seemed to be, to me, I'd climb that mountain. I was like, oh, cool. I'm never going to do this as cool as I just did.
yeah.
And it's time to like do something else. So that was just such a breath of fresh air to go and do that. I did end up then, of course, once I was over there, I did end up being an engineer and a little programming, but not so much because that record's not really about that. And but then there were some other songs that just needed some acoustic guitar on them, and Reeves just kind of handed it off to me and said, "You want to have a go at it?" I was like, "Okay, sure." So then I'm like, doing some guitar in that record. So he knew I played guitar by that point. But then what really shifted it was then they did this show called VH1 Storytellers.
Sure.
Right at the right when we finished Hours, right before it was released, but in that little gap, it was going to be kind of partly a promo for that release. And I knew for those songs they were going to need an extra guitar player because then it was only Reeves in the band.
Yeah.
I knew they're going to need an extra guitar player and they're going to need an extra acoustic guitar player, right? Specifically to do some of these songs that are, have a lot of acoustic guitar in it so that Reeves stays electric, all that. So I said to Reeves, I said, y'all are going to need an extra guy. What if it was me? Since I played a lot of this stuff, me, you don't have to bring in somebody and, hope their personality fits and hope and he and Dave were like, yeah, that makes total sense, and because I was like, I'll just do one show, one gig, that's it. That's really all I wanted to do. It was like, oh, one show would be really fun to play. But then, David looking for new interesting elements, it was like all of a sudden, oh, now I'm in the band. I'd never left the band after that. It was just, and then Reeves left, and I became the band leader. It was just this kind of crazy, rapid transformation. But I went with it. It was just seemed like a really, fun little twist in the road.
So I've been restraining myself from asking, and I how old you are, because you seem like you're about my age, so you must have been awfully young when this is all happening. Does it just seem like this was natural at the time that suddenly you're David Bowie's band leader?
A little bit because it's not that far from being a producer. In fact, David asked me to do it. I said, well, I don't know if I can, I've never done that. It was straight up. I didn't want to be like, yeah, I'll do it. And then, kind of have to fluff my way through it.
Yeah.
And he said, no, it's like being a producer, but you're on the bus. You know, it's kind of like doing the same job, but and you can't fire anybody obviously because you're out on the road, and you can't just be like interchanging people like you would in the studio. If you don't like what somebody did, oh, we'll try somebody else, see what it's, you can't do any of that. So, and it was, yeah, a really natural kind of, I wouldn't call it a transition, but just like a sidestep, I guess. Just a little, slightly different focus for the same sort of duties.
Yeah. So you're talking about the Hours album. That's the point that we're at. And I remember when that came out, I was really into One Outside and then Earthling. And Hours is a very different pace, change of pace. And my initial reaction to it was not as positive. But I've been listening to it. The older I get, I listen to it more and more, and I appreciate it more as an older person. And also, this year was its 25th anniversary, and it seemed like it was getting a lot of attention. There's a couple of EPs that came out that had live tracks off of Hours, and then some remixes, and it seems like it's finally getting its due, or at least from my perspective. Do you think that it took time to really be appreciated for what it is?
Yeah, I think so. I think just the climate in which it was released at the time. Yeah, it was maybe too much of a left turn for people based on where he'd been going before. I mean, the public at large just couldn't keep up with him. I mean, the fans could do that, and they expected that, and they really appreciated the fact that, you know, his work was this constant degree of, reinvention to keep it interesting for him. And but yeah, you're doing these records that are veering more and more kind of electronic and a little more, sometimes a little atonal, a little, experimental at times, and then you've got this record of songs, and people
Yeah.
are like, what? I've done it too. I've done it too. Or, artists I've been into, and then they put out a record that's, where they've taken a left turn, and I'm like, it takes me a minute to kind of get on the bus with them. But now we have, I guess, the advantage of looking at all these records independent of the time they were released, and and as well as our own lives when they were released, and we can see them, we can listen to them and look at them in a lot more kind of an independent way,
Yeah.
apart from the other work, and go, oh, okay, so it's a standalone record that I'm not listening to in the climate of 1999. You can make a totally different judgment call on it.
I've often wondered, for somebody who's just becoming familiar with Bowie now, a younger person, or somebody who just wasn't into the music before, how they experience everything being there all at once. Whereas, when I was growing up and starting to become interested in David Bowie, there was always a sense of the next album as part of a sequence. But that sequence, you're just saying that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, he would have a couple of records in a row that made sense in that way. Like you look at Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
As a genre. It seems like he's within the boundaries of a certain kind of genre. But then after that, then what, the Young Americans? Like what?
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
total at the turn. And some people just, they didn't want that to end. They didn't want glam to end.
Yeah. Hours, I don't know that there's another album that he signaled a change more than that. Just with the cover alone, the cover is his latest manifestation holding either a dead or exhausted version of his last manifestation.
Yeah.
And sort of a visual signal is I'm changing directions again.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I saw some of that even during Earthling, where I remember they're doing the Little Wonder video, and he had this mask made of his face from when he was like 20 or something,
Yeah.
that this actor in the video could wear it and be younger David. So he was kind of already knocking on that door, and I guess he was starting to see how fun that could be to like bring his his younger self back in the mix and go, oh wow, I could play off of myself in this kind of time lapse sort of thing, which it makes total sense to me.
Yeah. So so after Hours, you worked on an album that was not released for many years, that's come to be known as Toy. And I had heard actually a couple of bootleg versions of it before it was officially released. It's, if you people aren't familiar with it, it's a mix of songs, many of which would end up on the album Heathen, or versions of which, as well as new recordings of songs that Bowie wrote and originally recorded in the 60s before he was famous. Um, and I, at the risk of saying something critical, I think that his singing and the playing and the arrangement of the old songs sort of highlighted that he had become a better musician, and then throw in the Heathen songs. He had become a better songwriter, but the songs themselves were from a different period. What was the idea of mixing the new songs with the old songs, or why was he revisiting songs from the 60s?
Well, the original idea was not to mix songs, old songs and new songs. That kind of happened along the way. Uh, David being David, and starting to mix up the concepts a bit and be like, "Oh, I've got a new." He got inspired to write again. That was an interesting time for him because he had split with Reeves, and he had been writing with Reeves for the past, I don't know, 10 years, maybe something like that. So he was writing on his own again. So that was a really great thing to see, that he was like starting to write new songs. He was getting very excited about it. But that whole record came from that VH1 Storyteller show, where he wanted to play one of those songs
Yeah,
from the 60s so he could tell a story about it, about
yeah,
the period, because that's the whole premise of that show, was like, here's a song and here's why I wrote it, when I wrote it, what was going on, all, telling the story about, storytellers, blah, 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 the story about why this song is here. So he chose this song called Can't Help Thinking About Me, which was this real completely archetypal mid 60s, rock thing, which really was so fun to play. Which he thought too, because then it's like we just kept playing it. He kept playing it live. Like, it was just really fun to do. And then there was a moment we were in Ireland at a show, and we played that, and Joe Elliott from Def Leppard was at the show, and he came back to meet us after that, and he said, you should do a whole record of those. That was really great, because like you said, he's taking these old songs but now playing it in this 30 years later kind of context of of his own growth and maturity as a musician and vocalist and all the rest, and having this band just crank it out with him, and I don't know if that spurred him on, or if he even remembered that, but early in 2000 he said, I think I want to do a 60s record where we do exactly this, where we get this band, we get these tunes, and we go and we crank them out. We just
yeah.
like that, and which is basically what that record is. It's kind of like a live in the studio kind of party. That record was so much fun to do. I mean, we did some pre-production on it just to make sure, oh, here's the songs we want to do. Here's like the, structures of the song, thing, real basic stuff, but nothing like trying to reinvent the wheel at all. It was more just saying, okay, who's in the band, and letting, like typically with David, like letting the band be the band, let them do their thing with a little guidance as far as like, here are the tunes, tempos, all that basic stuff, and then you run. And that was kind of it. That was kind of the idea, and it would be a real quick thing, and it was pretty quick. He did all his vocals like on the recording days. Some overdubs. We added some color later, which is where David discovered Jerry Leonard, because Jerry Leonard was a friend of mine who I'd worked with Duncan Sheik, and with Lisa Germano, who, God, I knew from Indiana University. And her violin was just something very, very different for this music, and really gave it a kind of different kind of soulful edge. And that was really it, for that. But then he started to get, he was moving. David always be moving. And he's like, well, I have these new songs I want to try to like do now. And this was before Heathen was Heathen, obviously. It was, but then it wasn't released. It was, the label was kind of, I don't know, they just dragged their heels with it. And
Why did he have trouble getting that release?
Because sometimes labels are labels and they don't kind of get what you're doing, and,
Yeah.
And things like that. And I guess, he's had that happen, throughout his career. Like after he did Station to Station, RCA was like, wait a minute, we need Young Americans too. They if you think we don't like when artists kind of like change directions, they really don't like it, because I'm like, what do we do with this guy? How do we promote this now? Is a whole other thing, it's they don't really know what to do. And you've got him. I mean, look at his 90s output, starting from like, Black Tie, White Noise to, Outside, Buddha Suburbia, Earthling, Hours. It's like all over the shop. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then you throw in this.
Yeah.
A record of songs he wrote 30 years ago. And, they're like, what? So. And that was annoying that they just couldn't see it and just put it out already, and then he was moving on. It was like, all right, he just kind of figured it would have its day, I guess, at some point. And some of it got released, not on Heathen, but as like, they used some of it as B-sides, and bonus tracks. They used it for that. But the songs on Heathen that were from that were the new songs that he'd written. One was called Afraid, and the other one was, it was a song called Uncle Floyd that then they adapted to a song called Slip Away.
Yeah.
But Afraid was basically the same production that we had done. It was kind of, Sterling drums, I was on bass. I forget who else was part of that. I played acoustic guitar. David played stylophone, I believe. And then they added some things to that, but it was basically that production with some more stuff in it, But Uncle Floyd didn't make it. They rearranged it and gave it a whole new kind of underbelly, which was cool. I mean, that worked out really nicely too. So while Toy was not really part of Heathen, I think it definitely moved the needle a bit as far as, him starting to write again on his own, because that's kind of what he started to do, was to just, go writing on his own, and he came up with Heathen.
Yeah. So that's eventually Toy was released posthumously, and there's a couple of different versions. The one that I purchased was the toy box, or box of toy, which has a lot of music on it. And
Yes, it does.
yeah, so
well, it got leaked. Like some of the rough mixes and stuff got leaked around 2011 or something. And there was this story about how it was on my laptop, and I left my laptop on the subway, and that's how it got leaked.
Literally your laptop?
My laptop, which is fantastic.
How did you leave your laptop on the subway?
I didn't.
Mark, what are you doing?
I didn't. I found it to be just hysterical. Like, oh, so I leave a laptop on the subway, and whoever finds it is not like, oh, hey, there's bank information here. Oh, there's all this, personal
Yes.
stuff. I can totally like, get this guy's identification, whatever. No, they don't look for any of that. It just happens to be found by some Bowie fan who's like, oh, wow, I found the lost record. It's fantastic.
So so do you know what actually happened? Because I heard it a bootleg version years ago.
It must have been just sometimes we take CDs home with us, and it
Yeah,
must have just come from one of those, at the
yeah,
time. I can't really think of any.
yeah.
It's like that could happen. So it must have been, but I do love that laptop story. Oh,
So after Toy, I wanted to ask you about you played with Bowie live multiple occasions. I wanted to ask about one concert in particular, which was the Glastonbury Festival, which has turned into a great live album. And
right.
I've read that the organizers of the festival took some convincing that David Bowie would be a big draw, and that the concert has been viewed as kind of a comeback, which I don't understand, because it seemed to me like any thought that he was coming back had already been established by that point. How much of that is myth, or what's the real story there? It was a huge concert and very successful.
I don't know. I don't know much about that as far as like what the organizers were thinking, like, oh, he's not going to fill the room or whatever. I never heard anything like that, like that there was a
Okay.
concern, like, oh, it maybe isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything about that. It was actually right before Toy.
Right before. Okay.
Yeah, like, because we rehearsed for, oh, I don't know, 4 weeks or something. We really rehearsed. Um, and we rehearsed a lot of the Toy material then too, which is a large part of that record was the fact that, as a band, we were a pretty well-oiled machine when we went into the studio, which made it all the more easy to do it.
Yeah. So you're playing a festival concert like that in front of tens of thousands of people, and then the next night you might be playing a small venue. Do you prefer audience size, or is it a different type of playing depending on the type of feedback you're getting from the audience?
That's funny because that happened actually. Like the first stadium gig I ever did was this thing called Net Aid in September, October '99. And that was a huge, like one of those big charity things. And
Yeah.
the artists and um, Wembley Stadium, it's packed. And that was pretty wild. And then the next night we're in Dublin and it's like 500 people. It's like,
Yeah.
big shift of gears. I prefer the smaller shows,
Yeah.
not because it's actually it's a little more intimidating, the smaller shows, because you can see people, you can see faces and reactions. And the stadium thing, it's quite a spectacle. I'll give you that, but after you do it a couple of times, it's like, well, okay, it's just a, I can't really tell how this is, I can't tell how it's sort of, yeah, they're into it, but I can't get any personal kind of feedback, I guess.
Yeah.
I tended to prefer the more, you know, shows like the Beacon in New York,
Yeah.
like that size were really, 'cause you've got a pretty nice sized crowd, but you can really feel it.
You've mentioned Reeves Gabriel's a few times as we're talking, and he happens to live in the next town over from where I live. And
Oh, really?
yeah, uh,
He's in Troy, right?
Troy, yeah, I live in Albany. And he frequently on his Facebook page will post, "Hey, everybody, I'm going to be playing at this bar in like 2 hours. Come over and see me." And one time I was able to do that. I'm actually going to see him at a very small venue in January, and
Right.
I go to it's a bar and there's maybe 50 people there, and there's Reeves Gabriel's and his imaginary friends, but he's this, I've seen him play arenas, and right now he's doing he's with the Cure, and he's got a #1 hit album in the UK with the Cure, and it seems like I'm thinking about him because I've seen him very up close. But I'll generalize it. It seems like you guys just love to play, and it almost seems like a compulsion.
It kind of is,
Yeah.
actually. It's very much that, where, you know, you got Reeves Gabrels with the Cure, you've got Reeves Gabrels with his imaginary friends. So you got both of those. And for him, it's like kind of, I wouldn't say all the same, but it's all playing.
Yeah.
It is that. And yeah, it's a completely different setup, and the Cure is like a big machine, and obviously that's all like arenas and everything, and but it's all playing.
Yeah.
Kind of that, and yeah, there is like yeah, if I go too long without playing something, it's really, I start to forget like what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
Why am I alive? It gets a little of that, it's kind of like that.
Well, let me ask you about two more albums. And I thank you for doing this. You've been incredibly generous with your time. So Heathen, one of my favorite Bowie albums, one of my favorite albums. I really got the sense that he had perfected the sort of middle-aged anxiety sentiment with that album, and he had sort of captured a tension that existed at the time. I've read that it's been interpreted as a reaction to 9/11, but I've also read that it was almost all done before that. When you're working on an album like that, do you have a sense that the album is about something, or are you really focused on discrete elements of individual songs, or something in between?
I look at something in between. I think you can't help but be, you can't help but be influenced by what happens out there, out in the world, especially then. I mean, it's you can't help it. An event like that seeps into everything.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, the other day I posted I did, at that time I was working on a remix of a song for The Cure, and right when that was happening, 9/11, and I have to say that really informed where I went with it. It totally did. I don't think you can help it. It's just,
Yeah.
if you're an artist, you can't, I think sometimes maybe we have a little difficulty with compartmentalization, and these things, they're just going to seep into your work, you can't help it. That's part of, being this person that absorbs and from the world, and or however you want to put it. And I think you can't help it.
So was that in fact the case with Heathen, or Reality was the next album, which has several direct references to New York, and also I just recently noticed that there's two separate songs that have the term "By the Dawn's Early Light," which is out of the national anthem. It seems like Reality is more directly influenced by that event, but did that event influence Heathen as well, the 9/11 event?
As far as the writing, I couldn't say.
Yeah.
This is, this gets into a slippery slope of trying to get inside somebody else's head, and
Yeah.
I'm not really comfortable doing that. Like,
Sure. Okay.
what
Yeah.
was he thinking at this time? But I do know that it affected him. It affected us all. If you were living here, I mean, uh, I mean, that it was burning for 2 months. How could that not? How could that
Sure.
not influence your work and
Yeah.
influence everything? We couldn't escape it. That was the thing. You were living, you could not escape that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would
Wow.
say, maybe I could see it,
Yeah.
from the fact that you know, that would influence, God, your life as a whole. So
Yeah. Well, well, so you are very much we're talking a lot about the past, but you're, as I sort of indicated when I introduced you, involved with a lot that's very current and laying the seeds for the future. What's next? What's next for you? What are you working on? Who are you working with?
well, that's interesting you say that, because sometimes things like this, I don't like doing them, because
Yeah,
it's nice to kind of go back to all these stories and these times, and you know, rev up the time machine and all that. But I don't know. I want to be around now.
yeah,
In today. That's what keeps me kind of doing this. And um, I always feel like whatever I'm working on right now is like the coolest thing I've ever done, just because I guess I brought all this experience or whatever along with me, but just, I don't know. I think today is what matters.
so what are you working on today?
I am, got a couple of different things. I'm getting ready to start an album with a British artist called Charlie Winston, who I worked with, God, 10 years ago?
Yeah,
Longer, actually, 2009. And we had a pretty successful record then in France, actually, of all places. I ended up going to France for a while and doing a lot of work there. And we're going to finally regroup and do a new record together. And myself as producer. I've been working with, as you pointed out, the cutting room, this young artist called Zone, who I've been producing and co-writing with actually here at my little place. She's brilliant, opera
yeah,
trained vocalist. You saw a great performer.
yeah, yeah,
It's very exciting to watch somebody kind of get their wings.
yeah.
So there's that too. There's people send me things to work on to mix. A lot of times I just mixed a record for somebody in Pennsylvania called Josh Finzel, which was kind of a really Americana-ish record, which really wonderful record. I've been working with this collective out of Portland, Oregon, not Maine, called Rooftop Screamers, where they send me a song, bare bones, and I basically just kind of add all the meat and potatoes, and then somebody sings it, and there's that. And yeah, I mean, and that's been fun because sometimes he gets great people to sing it, sing his tunes. Like one time we did a song with the singer from The Fix. That was great. Um, and other things like that, they just come through here. Most of my stuff just comes to me now from people, from the especially post-pandemic, where my travel, like everybody's travel, got pretty interrupted.
Yeah.
Before that, I was going to Europe a lot and working, but now, between the pandemic and the internet, I just get sent things to work on, and that's kind of it.
I feel like I see your name everywhere. So, so look, I'm just going to ask you two closing questions. The one is, so somebody's watching this interview, and we've gotten to this point, and we've mostly talked about, with the exception of the last question, we've mostly talked about the work you've done with Bowie. But regardless of whether it was with Bowie, what would you suggest to somebody who wants to know the best thing that they could listen to that you were involved with?
And I was trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And it's just impossible. It's kind of like, in some ways, it's like, which is your favorite child? It's a little, I wouldn't say unfair, but it's just everything has its place. And there's sonic considerations, musical considerations, production considerations to call into that, and I don't know, they're all such different experiences. Like producing isn't the same every time for me. I don't have a method. Like it all depends on the person, how we're going to get from A to B, and where that they're at in their lives,
Yeah.
in their careers and their development. So that's always different, which is for me again really makes it interesting to me that
Yeah.
it's not the same. Like, oh, on this record, I'm going to be I'm going to be X. I'm going to be this other person. I'll have this is my role on this record, and it won't be the same next time. I'll
Yeah.
have to keep I have to keep adapting, which I think that's just key to this is to keep to keeping fresh is to you have to keep adapting to whatever's thrown at you.
Yeah. It's well, I didn't get a single recommendation from that. So
Well,
yeah.
okay, I could a couple of things. I'd say one of the coolest things I thought I played was this Duncan Sheik song called "Wishful Thinking."
Yeah.
Because that was like right when I think I was really into playing fretless bass, and that I listened to that earlier. I was like, I really still am so into that. Like, it really is a really cool part of that song. And that's actually myself and Jerry Leonard before I even met him, because I got the tracks to work on. I ended up, it was like a friend of mine was producing. He said, we have to mix this, but there's no bass. It's like, oh, I guess let's put bass in it. So it just happened to be that. So that was a real kind of nice little moment. And I feel like it really is a moment in my playing I'm really quite happy with. As far as being mixer person, maybe Dead Man Walking off of Earthling.
Yeah, sure.
That was pulling together a lot of different parts. Because we really went a little hog wild on putting ideas into that song and what could work here, what there. And I had to really kind of do like the sculptor thing with the, freeing it from the marble, as it were, and really making I really wanted to make a journey out of it,
Yeah.
beginning to end. And I really felt like I hit it with that.
Yeah.
I nailed that. Like, this really is an experience, this sort of really, and that was maybe the first time I kind of did that where, I got into making these kind of epic pieces like that had a real arc. And so I was always really pretty happy with that. And I don't know, producing's tricky, like, because it's just so different. I mean, Toy was a great production just because we did what we set out to do. And it was like,
Yeah.
here's a band and get them to play and put them in a place that they're comfortable playing and keep the fire burning, keep the flow going so that everybody's feeling creative and no drama, things like that. So that was a nice moment too, just to kind of hit on that. But there's been loads of others like that too that, this Charlie Winston artist, this was a good one where this is a nice moment where one song, he had a band. I said, we're going to do one song live, totally live, vocals and everything. One, doesn't have to be the first take, but we're going to nail this. We did it a few times. It came close, but there always somebody just missed it. Took a break, had some dinner, came back, tried it again, and nailed it. And God, how ecstatic everybody was that we actually achieved that, like, as a band and in this room together. That was an amazing little moment. So there's lots of things like that I could call up if I keep thinking about it and bore you to tears with it.
It's not boring at all. I this is actually wonderful. But let me ask you one closing question, which is the most superficial question I could ask, but I ask this of everybody. What is your favorite Bowie album, whether you worked on it or not, and favorite Bowie song?
Wow. If I had to, I'd probably pick Station to Station.
Yeah.
Because when that was released, I was ripe for that. I was the right age. Um, I understood it. It was on the radio a lot, believe it or not. Like around here, it was on the radio. You can believe it, a record like that would be on the radio, but it was. Uh,
So maybe I am younger than you. So I was maybe 7 when that came out. I, the song Station to Station made it on the radio a lot.
on album radio, yeah.
Okay, all right,
Not as much as like say Stay,
yeah,
Golden Years, uh, TVC 15. I heard
yeah,
all on the radio. I was 14 when that came out. That's what I'm saying. I was like ripe.
yeah,
I knew about him before that.
yeah,
I remember when I was learning to play guitar and I heard Space Oddity, and I'm like, that's a weird chord to put in there, right? In this one spot. Like, why would he do that? That is like, that chord should be minor and it's major. And it's like, okay. And that kind of set this whole thing up for like, well, this guy breaks the rules. But that was the first record that really I dialed into as a Bowie album.
yeah.
Favorite song? Hard. That's tough. That kind of changes a lot. Ashes to Ashes was big for me for a while, I'm sure,
Yeah.
Still is like kind of for me a pretty amazing song. But it's really hard to pick one.
No one likes answering that question because all of us would give a different answer the next day.
Yeah, then it's like, well, what am I leaving on the table?
Yeah.
Like everything.
Right.
It's like it's funny, like doing this cutting room to circle completely around, doing this cutting room show. I mean, we've got like this list of, I don't know, like 40 tunes that we could do. And we have to cut some. There's just so much time.
Yeah.
What do we cut? It's really impossible. Well, God, with this one, that's my favorite. Oh, and it's really difficult to say, like, what's your favorite? And you're right, it changes like every other day or whatever.
Well, I'm going to be there on the 9th, and if you choose to do 40 songs, I'm not going to object.
Yeah, see, I could play all night personally.
Yeah.
But at some point the club has to close.
Yeah. Well, Mark Plati, this has been really wonderful, a really special conversation, and I am greatly, greatly appreciative. I'm glad we made the connection. I look forward to seeing you at the cutting room and thereafter. So thank you. Any final words?
Not really, other than, I don't know. I love doing this. I hope it shows.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely does. So again, cannot thank you enough. Let's stay in touch.
Brilliant. Cheers, man. Thank you.